Welcome to class tonight. I do hope that you all are doing very well. Tonight we're going to be taking the idea of ratios a step further by talking about what we call proportions. Now the nice thing is you have already learned and been using proportions in math class. We just have not been using those specific terms. Now I'm going to try to help you remember this. All the way back in chapter 2, we learned that in an equation, so for example, we learned that both sides, this side and this side of the equation, of the equal sign, must be equal. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the nice thing is, a proportion states that, basically the exact same thing, only we're going to be talking about ratios. Now remember, ratios can look like fractions, and that's what you see on the board there. Now the definition, this is in your book, by the way. I would encourage you to go and open your book to page 278 to go ahead and check that out. I'd encourage you to look at that definition at the very bottom of the page. This is an equation stating that two ratios are equal. Now on the board you see an example of a proportion. This ratio and this ratio are equal, and I can prove it like this. I know that from 1 to 4, if I'm going to go from 1 to 4, I multiply by 4. I know that if I go from 2 to 8, I multiply by 4. And remember, we learned all the way back in chapter 3 that if I can multiply or divide the both sides by the same, it is equal. So, right here we have equivalent ratios, or what we call a proportion. Now this is really helpful because we can use our understanding of proportions then to see if certain problems are proportions. So the answers to these questions, you'll find these questions actually on page 279, and you'll also find them in your homework tonight. When the directions say, do the ratios in each pair form a proportion? Your job is really, really simple. Here, I'll show you. So I'm going to go from 2 to 8. How do I go from 2 to 8? Well, I multiply by 4. 5 to 20. How do I go from 5 to 20? Well, I multiply by 4. Bam! I multiplied both sides by 4, so the answer is yes. That is a proportion. So I can say 2/5 is equivalent to 8/20. Next one right here. How do I go from 12 to 4? Well, I would divide by 3. So, right here, 52 to 14. Let's see what I do. So, I don't have that off the top of my head, so let's try it out. 52 divided by 14. Well, 14 times 2 is 28. 14 times 3 is going to be, so it's 12, that's 3, 42, or I don't think we're getting closer than that. So 3, that's going to be 42, we're going to subtract and get 10. Ugh, it doesn't divide evenly. I'd get 3 and 10/14, which would be really, really ugly. So, while it's really close, it's not exact. It's 3 and something else. 3, yeah, so the actual answer would be 3 and, was it 10/14? And that doesn't work. This and this are not the same thing. So this one is not a proportion, or we would say no, it does not form a proportion. Last one, I'll do this in a different color. 8, 5, 36, and 20. Well, let's see, I go from 5 to 20 by multiplying by 4. That's easy. 8 to 36. I can't multiply by 4. It'd be 4 and something else. 4 and 2/4, so 4 and 4. 4.5. Okay? So that would not work. So it'd be some other number. So this answer is not a proportion as well. Now you see how really easy this is, and you see we've already been kind of doing these things. This should remind you a lot of finding equivalent fractions, something we've been doing a lot in class. So the first step, pretty easy. Now this next step is where it gets, we'll say, slightly tricky. Just a little bit tricky. Still not tricky, but just a little bit tricky. Our first proportions could be solved by simply finding equivalent ratios. That's what we did just a minute ago. These next proportions actually need to be solved by finding what we call a unit rate. Remember, the unit rate you should remember that from yesterday. Finding a unit rate first and then solving. Now, remember yesterday, finding a unit rate is simply dividing the bigger number by the smaller number. That gives us a unit rate, and then we can use that unit rate to solve the proportion. What do I mean? Let's show you in practice. So this is example 2 on page 279, but it says a hybrid car can travel 260 miles, important, using 5 gallons of gas, important. How many miles can the car travel using 8 gallons? So I know that in 5 gallons of gas, it can travel 260 miles. That's my first ratio. I want to find how far will it go in 8 gallons. Now you cannot go from 5 to 8. It's times some weird creepy number, less than, well, a little bit more than 1. I can't automatically just use a multiplication like I did back here. I have to actually find a unit rate first. Now this is actually very easy, because all I do, I'm going to focus on this one right here. I'm going to find that unit rate and then use it over here. So remember, to find the unit rate, I divide the bigger number by the smaller number, and I get, I'll speed things up, the answer is 52. We get 25 minus 1. So the answer is 52. So I go from here to here, I times 52. 5 times 52 equals 260. I'm going to do the exact same thing over here. So to solve this problem, I use my unit rate. 8 times, right over here actually. 50, oh my goodness, this first game right today. 52 times 8, so that's going to be 1641, 416. So I can go 416 miles on 8 gallons of gas, and you see how I used my unit rate to solve that. Now, normally I do stop at this point in time, but I want to cover cover 2 more, because this is such a very big deal, and because it looks scary, but it really isn't. It's really pretty easy. So right here I have another one. Proportion, ratio, or I have 2 ratios, and I want to make a proportion. So I find my unit rate first. 4 to 12, well, I simply multiply by 3. 4 times 3 equals 12. So what am I going to do here? Times 3. So the answer is going to be 15. 5 times 3 equals 15. That's I use my unit rate and solve. And you see how easy it is. Next one. My unit rate, now once again I take this bigger number and divide it by the smaller number. Okay, it's not top and bottom, it's bigger or smaller. And you get 3, 0. So from here to here, times 3. From here to here, guess what you do? Times 3, and you get 6. And so 6 is the final answer. That answers or solves that proportion. I found equivalent ratios. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I hope this is clear. I hope this seems easy, because it really is. Remember the big idea. You've got to make sure both sides of the proportion, so both ratios, are equivalent. I showed you guys how to do that. Your homework tonight is going to be page 280 and 281, numbers 3, 6, 9, 12, and 15. Once again, page 280 and 281, 3, 6, 9, 12, and 15. Have a great night, and see you all tomorrow.